Ladies and gentlemen, Sue Salthouse has worked as a system advocate in the area of social justice and human rights since 1996. Australia's ratification of the United Nations Human Rights Convention provide the scaffold she uses to address the discrimination and marginalisation experienced by women and girls with disabilities. Since 1997, Sue has convened Women with Disabilities ACT. She's a board member of Rights and Inclusion Australia, and Sue is the 2014 ACT Senior Woman of the Year. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sue Salthouse. Yeah, how would you like it? Yeah, sure.
I wanted to talk today in terms of social change about, naturally, the National Disability Insurance Scheme and how I believe that it must lead the social change that we want to have, that Cassandra has been talking about today. I'm not going to touch on any of the budget measures or welfare payments that affect people with disabilities. I just want to concentrate a little bit on how we've got to where we are and where I want this initiative to take us further. I too would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people on whose land we meet today, and to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Cassandra's touched on human rights, and every time I see this opening gambit from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, I think, well, that's it. We don't need anything else. But you can see under there a picture from the 1930s of people with disabilities in an asylum. Social engineering influencing popular attitudes and our behaviours on a large scale. I think we have to bring it back to the fact that there is responsibility on all of us. And I wanted also to reflect on how we start on this pathway. Now, Australia first started its welfare payments in 1908. Most of the welfare payments have been driven by the need to look after returning soldiers, but we started in 1908. But we can skip straight down to the major driver for what's happening today was in 2008 when we signed a cross-cutting human rights treaty, and that's the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And that kicked off, and it came in conjunction with a government that had some empathetic understanding of what marginalised people in society were enduring, so that the Productivity Commission came up, had a study into disability, and it came up with the fact that the system at the moment is underfunded, unfair, fragmented and inefficient. I've heard that so many times over the last 2 years. It's a mantra, but it's something that we have to look at, that changes, that where we need changes in society. Where is disability in Australia today? We have lower spending per person as a percentage of GDP of any nation in the OECD. We're 27th out of 27 for relative poverty risk. We're 50% as likely to be employed as non-disabled people, compared to 10% higher in the OECD. 45% of us live at or near the poverty line. So there's a definite driver there, that need for social change. It's an urgent need, but we say, as Cassandra said so eloquently today, our mantra is nothing about us without us. We must be in the room. We must be seen as the people who have the expert voice, no matter from what position of disadvantage we come. And that nothing about us without us was coined in 1981, and we certainly want to be there, and it's an important part of social change, that you take with you at the very forefront of that the people for whom the change is most important. We come in disability from a deficit model where the blame is imputed on the person And although I said I won't touch on it, that is exactly what's being put back on us with these changes to welfare payments and obligations. But we need, with this social model, with this change, to move to a social model, and this goes across all aspects of our lives and all aspects of our society, and puts responsibility onto everybody in Australian society, whether disabled or not. And it says that what we have to do is change our environment. From telecommunications, the NBN is the greatest hope for people with disabilities. But to ramps, to get up slightly better than that, I think. But we also have to, part of the social change, the social model change, has to be inside our heads. And that's where the responsibility comes to everybody in the room. The CRPD has this human rights basis. It is the imperative, the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. As you know, that I'm really concerned about the double disadvantage that occurs to women with disabilities. This convention is a blueprint, and it has a special article there that recognises the disability, the discrimination that women feel. But it also has a special article about awareness raising, and that brings us back straight away to our responsibility. Now, the CRPD has driven National Disability Strategy. We didn't have one for a while, it fell into a hiatus, but once we'd signed that CRPD, it became something that we had to operationalise, and we did it through the National Disability Strategy. And all the articles, all the business articles of the convention are embodied in our National Disability Strategy. So the National Disability Strategy drives equity, and the NDIS is only a tiny part of what has to happen in the whole of society in order to bring on board a group of marginalised people. And we might look at this as a model for how we bring on board all sorts of marginalised groups in our society. So I want us to look at that outer circle, which is, we tried to get away from the term, it's tier one, it's every Australian. It's 22 million of us who have to have a mind change in order that people with disabilities are not relegated to the outer. Tier two is 4 million people with disabilities who just need a little bit of help, and I'll come back to that later. Tier three is all we hear about at the moment. They're people with severe and profound disabilities who need. Profound disabilities, by definition, means that you need everyday help for your activities of daily living. But there's 4 million of us who don't need that degree of help, but we do need your mind change, and we do need to be in your workforce. And I mean your workforce, not some esoteric group out there. It's your workforce. So the NDIS needs to drive social change. It's not intended to replace other mainstream systems. Where am I up to now? Yes. So we do need to recognise that women and girls with disabilities are subject to multiple discriminations, and that needs to be part of the NDIS. My work is concentrated at the moment in getting the NDIS and its governing body to recognise that double discrimination, because if we don't recognise it within the NDIS, we won't bring about the changes that we need to have. And I say that because Australia is one of the most gendered societies in the OECD. So we know that that gender discrimination exists. We're still fighting a gender pay gap of 17% and widening. We're number one in education of women, and we are 22 in employment of women. We need to ask ourselves why that's happening in our society. Now, this Tier 3 picture that I trot out all the time shows you that there are about the same numbers of men and women with profound and severe disabilities across all disability groups and across all ages, about the same number of men and women. But do you know, at the moment, men get 60% of the services and 60% of the welfare payments. So certainly the NDIS needs to address that change. And that's where we come back to considerations of equity, not equality. I hope you recognise that the people in this picture are certainly unisex people in unisex clothing, and it just shows us, but I think actually they're guys, and I'm sorry that we didn't find a picture that actually had women in it. But that's another story. What we're looking for in this social change is equity, not equality. And you can see it graphically there, that some people need a bigger help up in order that we have an even playing field. And in fact, the ACT task force on the NDIS is the only jurisdiction to appoint a gender advisor to the task force. And we've come up with 4 recommendations for the National Disability Insurance Scheme advisory body, and that is, when someone is taken into the NDIS, the planners need to use gender-based questions. We know that women with disabilities experience violence at 2 to 10 times the rate, and with intellectual disability it's much closer to 10 times. If you don't have an understanding of post-traumatic stress and how it affects your behaviour, then the planners are not going to get to the core of the supports that woman needs. We need training materials so that the planners know what questions to ask. We need targeted strategies so that when we look at the NDIS and Tier 3 people in 12 months, 2 years' time, we will see that inequitous distribution of funding has been eliminated. I'm going to go straight to, I'm going to lose where I am, those Tier 2 people. I want to look at there's 800,000 women who have just slight disabilities and who need a leg up into your workforce, and that's your workforce. So those are the people with mild to moderate disabilities. The NDIS in Tier 1 is for absolutely everybody in society, and it has to be a driver that changes attitudes to people with disabilities, and that's the major part of this social change. So the NDIS and its governing bodies has some responsibility to bring about that social change. They have to be a leader in gender diversity. They have to seek equal representation of women on all their boards and councils. At the moment, there are 3 women on the governing board, only one of whom has a disability. On their advisory council, out of 12 people, there are 6 women, but only 2 have disabilities. Nothing about us without us as part of this social change. We must be in the room, and it must be our voices that are heard. And the Governing Council and the NDIS has to use targeted measures to promote women with disabilities. The United Nations Committee for CEDAW, CRPD, says mainstream measures are not enough. You have to do some targeted things. You have to do some collection of data that gives you the evidence base. So we have to use the NDIA, the agency, and the NDIS to drive social change and to mean that social change for women with disabilities. I come back to who else has to do that, who else has to do that heavy lifting, to coin a term. That's a bar graph now of the percentage of people with disabilities who were safe enough to disclose their disability in public services across the land. There's only 2.9% of the Australian public service are people with disabilities. And then the other graphs show local government and state governments. Tasmania's leading the way, 7%. I think we need to aim for at least 7% people with disabilities across our public services. But we also need to look at every organisation, every non-government organisation, and to ask ourselves, where are the people with disabilities employed in your organisations? If we want our organisations to reflect the diversity of our communities, then we need to ensure that we can make the adjustments to put a certain percentage of people with disabilities into our organisations. I'm on the judging panel for the National Disability Awards this year, and I've been reading applications for people in employment. And some of the big organisations, corporations in this country, want an award for employing 0.22% of their employees as people with disabilities. I'm not interested. Look at 7% of your employees, or look at what Westpac has done and have 11% of your employees, and then we can start to get somewhere of recognising diversity and bringing about social change. So what will success look like? It'll look like when we're everywhere. So thank you very much for listening.